Hello, I'm Brian Downs and this is ProSex Studio. In this video we're going to be taking a look at 2018's Mary Queen of Scots, directed by Josie Rourke and starring Saoirse Ronan and Margot Robbie, two enchanting performers. We're going to be examining it the way I examine everything, to show that modern fictions, Hollywood movies, and so on are designed to program you with inescapable self-loathing about your sexuality. Sex is bad, stupid, foolish, evil, and avoided by good people. That's the constant message in Hollywood films and well-known TV series. Not all of them, of course, but a lot. Is Mary, Queen of Scots, this historical drama, an exception to that rule? The answer is no. A sub-theme on my series here is also bad behavior in female characters that we would never accept from male characters. If men did it, we would reject it as villainous. It would mark them as the villains. But when female protagonists do it, it marks them as having strength, resilience, and moxie. This is a, well, anti-feminist double standard. So, Mary, Queen of Scots. This, of course, is an interpretation of the historical story of Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth I of England. They were rivals for the English throne. Elizabeth eventually won that, as you know if you've seen a history book or Shakespeare in Love. But there's a great deal of intrigue and back and forth before that happens. About 17 minutes into this film, a character named Mistress Fleming, who is one of Mary's ladies-in-waiting, uses her sexuality to gain information from Queen Elizabeth's envoy to the Scottish court, George Dalglish, I believe. This is meme number 7, which I call flashbang tits. The idea that if women display their sexuality or dangle their sexuality, or even just nudity. The classic example is that they display their breasts to some guard and then surprise them and overwhelm them with force with their flashbang tits. The idea that men are idiots and that any display of female sexuality turns them into babbling morons. Even men like professional diplomats. Dalglish's character is clearly in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, and a man of great poise, articulate and intelligent, and relied upon by Queen Elizabeth to carry on extremely sensitive diplomatic relations, but when a lady-in-waiting makes out with him, he babbles all sorts of information about the fact that Queen Elizabeth might be dying of smallpox. This is also meme number 6. Heroines can pretend to sex. It's okay if a heroine dangles her sexuality, her beauty, her alluring nature in front of a man for the greater good, or what the movie is telling us is the greater good, what the movie wants, the agenda the movie wants us to support. That's fine. They can't actually have sex. That would be terrible. But heroines can pretend to sex. Shortly thereafter, we cut to a scene where the leader of the church in Scotland is railing against Mary. Now, the politics of the day was that England was split by religion. Protestantism was on the rise and very popular in Scotland. But Mary was a Catholic, and there were a lot of people who weren't thrilled with the idea of having a Catholic ruler. Anyway, the leader of the church, played by David Tennant, is giving a speech against her, railing about people who whore themselves to wealth and the degradations of the flesh. He doesn't have any evidence, of course, that Mary engages in whatever degradations of the flesh means. But this is meme number 4, by the way, serious people don't sex. This is kind of multi-sided, of course, because this church leader is telling lies about Mary, but how do you damage a person's reputation? By insinuating that they enjoy sex. That's how you do that. Especially in, what was it, 15th century Scotland. Within a minute of that, we see Mary played by the gorgeous Saoirse Ronan, who's in her early 20s, I think, at the time of this. The film was made. The historical Mary was in her late teens during these events. Mary is telling her ladies-in-waiting as they are together in her private chambers at night, just be wary of these men. Their love is not the same as their respect. They have been playing a little game, where she's saying to her ladies-in-waiting, have any of you kissed any of the local boys yet? And anyone who says that they did earns a round of giggles. Then Mary goes on to tell her ladies-in-waiting that she had been married previously to an aristocrat named Francois, a French aristocrat. They only tried to have sex once, but didn't accomplish it. She says, I've only lain with Francois. The poor boy did his best, but it was over before it began. Mary is presented here as rarely wanting sex, almost never enjoying sex or desiring sex. She is a sexual pawn of others, which is, I think, a strange way to characterize someone who you're presenting as a feminist hero, but okay. But of course, this is how Mary has to be presented, because meme number 4, serious people don't sex. There's no version of this story where Mary might say, oh yeah, Francois and I did it 4 times a week, never had any children though. I guess that was not God's will, and or Francois was sterile. This is also, by the way, meme number 10, sexy celibates. As I just said, Mary is gorgeous, Saoirse Ronan is gorgeous, very desirable, a queen, a princess, an aristocrat, a rich woman, makes her only all the more desirable, but her life is celibate or nearly so. Really, really attractive people also don't have any sex. Now that conversation is intercut with scenes of Margot Robbie as Queen Elizabeth having private conversations with her secret lover, Robert Dudley. Now Queen Elizabeth never married because it was not a good political maneuver, and as a result felt lonely much of her life. In this film, and probably historically as well. She had a secret relationship with an aristocrat named Robert Dudley. But that relationship will not produce a child or political advantage or lasting solace, and it's controversial. Members of the court suspect that she's involved in this relationship, and it's a big no-no. So again, sex is presented as dangerous. Sex is danger. That's negative meme number 3. Very commonly, sexual relationships are presented as dumb, irresponsible, dangerous. However, political necessity and plotting leads Queen Elizabeth to suggest that Mary get married to Robert Dudley because he's a British aristocrat, and that this would help smooth things over and create an alliance between Scotland and England. And this is presented as shockingly cold-hearted, the idea that Elizabeth would push forward a man to have a sexual relationship with Mary. Again, sex is negative, sex is bad. And you might say, but Elizabeth loves that man, therefore it's bad. And the story is constructed in that way. They chose this story to tell. They chose this historical material as their basis, and then of course they're interpreting history as well. Mary, Queen of Scots, does not marry Dudley. She considers it, but then she does not, and the movie shows her as being wise and perceptive, as having outmaneuvered Elizabeth by rejecting Dudley. Instead, she marries a young aristocrat, a Scottish aristocrat named Darnley. This turns out to be a bad choice. Darnley will be one of the principal villains of the piece. Now, why did she marry Darnley? Well, he's an aristocrat, he's got the necessary pedigree, but also they have a sexual encounter. He goes down on her. That's very clearly shown. There's no doubt about what's going on screen. He goes down on her. He licks her pussy with unusual skill, at least in her experience. And this is negative meme number 1, what I call the wanting disaster. Wanting sex, desiring sex, even just talking about sex sometimes, certainly having sex or trying to have sex, often leads to a terrible result. See any Friday the 13th movie. See lots of movies, really. Take a look at the MCU. If you're interested in the MCU, take a look at my videos on the subject. I've done videos on Captain America's sex life, Black Widows, and Tony Stark's. Those are available on this channel. But why does she marry Darnley? Because she has a terrific sexual encounter with him, one she enjoys very much, and her doom follows. We should also notice that Queen Elizabeth's relationship with her guy Dudley back in London never actually shows them having sex and never specifically refers to them having a sexual relationship. They clearly have strong feelings for one another and use the word love, I believe, to one another, but we don't see them having sex. That's kept out of the film because movies want to push that kind of thing out of sight. Also, when Dudley goes back to London from having been rejected, he took a trip to Scotland. Mary says, "I'm not marrying you." He goes back to London, and when he sees Elizabeth again, Elizabeth is badly disfigured with smallpox. She's covered in boils. Smallpox, of course, being a terrible disease that killed a lot of people in the pre-modern world. So, how did that go? Elizabeth says, "Hey, I like having sex with you," or "I want it." Well, she didn't actually say that, it's implied. "I want to have sex with you. Go get into a sexual relationship with Mary because that's necessary for political reasons." Mary rejects him. When he comes back to see the woman he loves, she is disfigured with boils and likely to die. So, that's the wanting disaster again. Bad results follow swiftly after any interest in sex. Meanwhile, back in Scotland, Mary's relationship with Darnley is not going very well. Darnley turns out to be a big jerk and also evidently gay, which is a problem for their marriage and the fact that the point of their marriage in this culture and time is to produce an heir. Darnley has had a homosexual encounter with a member of the court named Rizzio, who is originally Italian, but is in Mary's court in Scotland. Rizzio is a very great friend of Mary's, by the way, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Darnley has done a terrible thing by having sex with Rizzio. Mary is furious with Darnley, not with Rizzio, though. That's interesting. Anyway, Mary understands that she needs to reproduce with Darnley, so she summons her husband to her chamber. She sends for him. He arrives. He's drunk, which annoys her. He's often drunk. This is one of his many flaws. She makes no effort to seduce or entice him. She just starts undoing his pants. And this is where we come to my big sub-theme, bad behavior in female characters, that we accept because they're female. If a man did this, they would be the villain. If the woman does it, it proves she's got, guts. And there's a giant piece of that right now. Mary summons him to her chamber. He shows up. He's drunk. She makes no effort to seduce or entice him. She doesn't try to be sexy or seductive. She doesn't even say to him, "Hey, okay, I understand that you're a homosexual and having sex with me is not really in your wheelhouse. But, we do need to produce an heir. So if we can somehow just work through this, as soon as we get a couple of heirs manufactured, then we don't have to do this anymore. I hope you can work with me on this. I know it's unpleasant for you." No, nothing like that. What she does is she summons him in and she just starts undoing his pants. And he protests. He says, "No, whoa, hey, what are you doing? Hey, whoa, don't, thanks." She simply says to him, "Close your eyes." She pushes him into a chair. She straddles him, and it's all done with its suggested camera work, but it looks like she's trying to guide his penis into her vagina with her hand, the way she's sitting on him. He says, "No, I can't. I've had too much to drink." She doesn't stop. She doesn't get up. She doesn't apologize. She doesn't say maybe another time. She says, "Think of Rizzio." Now, I think this has been misunderstood. Yes, this is a direct reference to Darnley's homosexuality and his, sexual encounter with Rizzio earlier. But that's not what Mary is criticizing, right? What Mary is saying here is, this is happening whether you like it or not. You've just told me no, and I'm not stopping. Think of Rizzio if that's gonna, make your soldiers stand to attention. This is when Darnley slaps her. And of course, the movie presents Darnley slapping her as if he's a terrible villain. Oh my God, he's just struck a woman. She's sexually assaulting him. I happen to live in Florida. Here in modern Florida, that would be sexual assault. You start undoing somebody's pants, reach into their pants, grab a hold of their genitals while they're saying, no, thank you, no, don't want to. And you don't stop, then you're committing sexual assault. That's what's happening. And she says, think of Rizzio, which means shut up. That's what that means. It means this is happening, whether you like it or not. And that's when he hits her. Again, here where I live, your local laws might vary. He would be absolutely justified in scattering her teeth. If someone is sexually assaulting you in Florida, you have the right to use lethal force on them, actually. If you'd like to whip out a pistol to make your point, you're allowed to. He simply slaps her. But the movie presents this as him being a terrible villain. Let's turn it around. What if he had come into the room and said, I know you don't particularly like me, but we need to have an errand. I'm your husband, so hike your skirts up, right? And when she said no, he simply grabbed a hold of her, put his hand on her vagina. She slapped him. We would go, hooray for her. Yes, that's showing strength on her part. Good for her. She has every right to fight that son of a bitch. And I agree, she would. But when we have this situation where it's the woman sexually assaulting the man and he hits her, he's the bad guy now. But let's keep going. In response to this slap, Mary does not get off him. He's clearly indicated he's not interested. He's in fact upped his protest to physical violence. She doesn't get off him. She continues to straddle him. She starts striking him over and over and over again. She's slapping him on the shoulders, I believe. Clearly, her intention is to keep hitting him until he submits to sex. I'm going to return to the obvious. If we had reversed this situation, if he had come in and said, we need to make an error, hike your skirts up, and she said no, and hit him, and he just struck her several times until she submitted to sex, we would be horrified. Horrified, as well we should be. In fact, the movie might even wind up with the X rating. Is it X they still do? You know, beyond R. But when she does it to him, it proves that she's got, resilience and force of will and stuff. And by the way, her hitting him repeatedly does get him to acquiesce to sex. He changes his mind, throws her down, mounts her from behind, and has vigorous sex with her, which is now suddenly portrayed as being, uncomfortable for her. This is what she wanted when he came in the room. But now that she has slapped him into submission and he's been coerced in this way into having sex with her, it's presented as him assaulting her somehow, which is richly layered in horror and nonsense. He is somehow the bad guy for acquiescing to sex after being slapped into it. We get a shot of her ladies in waiting. They're waiting. Well, that's what they do, really. They're ladies. They're waiting. They're in the hall outside. They're hearing these sex noises, and they all look anxious and frightened by the sex. Sex is terrible. And of course, there's no way, and this is an interpretation. I don't believe there's any historical evidence that this encounter went this way, right? The filmmakers are assuming this, ugly encounter. They don't suppose he just got drunk enough one night to have sex with her. They don't suppose that she says to him, hey, okay, you're gay, I get it, but we need an heir, so try to work with me. Nothing like that. We're going to assume this ugly, negative sexual encounter where he's the villain somehow, because once she slapped him enough, he gave in. But again, sex is bad, sex is wrong, sex is danger. That's me number 2, I think. Danger is sex. It's villains who have sex. Darnley is a villain, and he had sex with her after being coerced into it with violence, but that still makes him the villain. So we have a lot of bad behavior by women and sex negativity in that scene, a shocking amount, really. And there's no more sexuality in the movie for a good long while, until about the 1 hour, 29-minute mark. Darnley, who is now in exile, having annoyed Mary, Queen of Scots quite enough, thank you, is spending an evening with his male lover, who I don't think even gets a name. Anyway, a character we haven't seen before. But Darnley has been exiled to some country house, and he's there with his male lover, and they kiss, and within seconds, boom, a bomb goes off, and the lover is killed, and Darnley flees the burning building, flees this political assassination attempt, where he is intercepted by assassins in the orchard outside of the garden, and is strangled to death. So, what do we have? We have two people, two consenting adults, in private, having a sexual encounter, of course, which would have been thought of as a mortal sin and against the laws of nature and God in Scotland in whatever this was, 1500 something. But again, two consenting adults having a private encounter, boom, bomb, fire, death, murder, strangulation, the wanting disaster. Wanting sex, having sex, attempting to have sex leads to something terrible very quickly. But now Mary is a widow. She was still married to Darnley. She's a widow now. And just a few minutes later, her heretofore loyal bodyguard, his name is Bothwell, is coercing the newly widowed Mary into marriage by, raping her, really. We see her having what is clearly a very unpleasant sexual encounter for her with him. She's being, forced into this politically and physically. So again, there's no positive sex here. Mary is never portrayed, only rarely portrayed as ever having a positive sexual encounter in her life, or ever really wanting sex at all, except with that one time where Darnley licked her pussy, and look what happened with that. And we're back, of course, to sexy celibates, that Mary is very beautiful, very, intelligent, well-educated, smart, but has almost no sex life, or not a good one. And to return to her relationship with her friend Rizzio before all of that. Yes, let's return to Rizzio. Back before Darnley is exiled and all that, Mary is great friends with the courtier Rizzio, who is gay, and likes to dress in women's clothing and otherwise displays LGBT behavior, including going to bed with Darnley and having sex with him, which makes Mary very angry at Darnley, but not at Rizzio. Mary's closest, most intimate emotional relationship is with Rizzio. Well, this is what I call meme number 12, your friends are your family, and family doesn't fuck. This story is constructed in such a way to make Mary's most important emotional relationship with someone she doesn't have sex with, because they don't have compatible sexual orientations in this case. But that's how this is. Her most rewarding emotional relationship is a non-sexual one, and her sexual relationships are disasters of suffering and horror. Eventually, she will be suspected of having a sexual relationship with Rizzio because they are so close, and other Scottish noblemen will murder Rizzio right in front of her, and this will lead to a cascade of schemes, plots, and disasters, leading eventually to Mary's beheading by Queen Elizabeth. It's a complicated story. But again, your friends are your family. Family doesn't sex. And sex is danger, wanting disaster, and all the usual list. So, that's Mary, Queen of Scots, 2018, directed by Josie Rourke, starring Saoirse Ronan in the title role. Beautifully shot film, terrific performances from Ronan and Margot Robbie, but absolutely from one end to the other stuffed with the sex negativity that is so common. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. Like, share, talk about this, put it on your Facebook profile, show it to your mom. She'll find it interesting. And come back for more in the future. I'm Brian Downs. This is Pro Sex Studio.